I heard the thud before I felt the humiliation. My boxes hit the concrete steps so hard they burst open, clothes and books spilling down the stairs like even my belongings were trying to escape this house. My mother stood at the top of the basement doorway with her arms crossed, her face cold and satisfied, pointing down into the darkness like she was sentencing me to prison. "You can sleep by the water heater," she said, her voice flat and final. "Since you clearly don't deserve a real room anymore, maybe some time down there will teach you to be grateful for what this family has given you." My aunt laughed from the kitchen doorway like it was the funniest thing she'd heard all month. Neither of them moved to help me gather my scattered things. Neither of them seemed to care that they were banishing me underground like something shameful that needed to be hidden. I stood there frozen, my cheeks burning, my throat so tight I could barely breathe. The basement smelled like mold and rust and decades of neglect. I was 24 years old, and my own family was shoving me into the darkness. They tossed a thin blanket down the stairs and slammed the door. As I dragged the old washer aside to make space, I spotted something wedged in the shadows, a dusty box they clearly never meant for me to find. My name is Leora Keene, and that night everything changed. I knelt on the cold concrete floor and pulled out the dusty shoebox with trembling hands. The lid was stuck from years of moisture and neglect, the cardboard soft and warped. I had to pry it open carefully with my fingernails, working the edges so nothing would tear. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it echoing off the basement walls. When I finally lifted the cover, my stomach twisted into a tight, painful knot. Inside were letters addressed to me that I'd never received, envelopes with my name and handwriting I didn't recognize, still sealed after what looked like years. Financial statements with my name printed at the top, showing accounts I'd never opened. A small USB drive tucked into a plastic sandwich bag. Old photographs of people I'd never seen. Documents that looked official and important, covered in legal language and stamps. All of it had my name on it. All of it had been hidden in this basement, wedged behind an appliance nobody had moved in years, buried in shadows and silence. Why would my family hide things that belonged to me? What were they so afraid I'd find? I spread the contents across my thin blanket and plugged in the small lamp they'd grudgingly left me. The night stretched ahead, dark and cold and full of secrets I was finally going to uncover. Around midnight, I heard them talking in the kitchen directly above me. The basement ceiling was thin, just wooden floorboards with gaps between them. Sound traveled through like the house itself wanted me to hear what they were planning. I pressed myself against the wall beneath the kitchen and held my breath, straining to catch every word. "Make sure Leora signs the papers before Friday," my mother said. Her voice was casual and businesslike, like she was discussing grocery lists or weekend plans. "The buyers want to close quickly, and we need her signature to make the sale legal. Without it, the whole deal falls apart." "She doesn't suspect anything?" my aunt asked, her voice muffled by the sound of a refrigerator opening. "She's in the basement. That keeps her out of the way and too beaten down to ask questions. By the time she figures out what happened, the house will be sold and we'll have the money. We can be gone before she even understands what we did." My aunt laughed, that same cruel, satisfied laugh from earlier. She always was the slow one, too trusting for her own good, too desperate to believe we actually cared about her. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from making any sound that would give me away. They were selling my grandmother's house without telling me. I thought back to my childhood, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. My grandmother had loved me fiercely. I was certain of that, even now. She taught me to bake bread on Saturday mornings, her hands guiding mine through the dough. She'd read to me every night until I was far too old to admit I still wanted it, doing different voices for each character. She'd told me this house would always be my home, no matter what happened, no matter how bad things got. Then my father left when I was 12 years old. No warning, no explanation, no goodbye. One morning he was eating breakfast at the kitchen table, and by dinner his closet was empty and his car was gone. My mother told me he'd abandoned us because I was too much trouble, too expensive, too difficult for anyone to love. After that, everything in my life changed. I became the family burden, the problem they tolerated, the disappointing daughter who could never do anything right no matter how hard she tried. When my grandmother got sick 3 years ago, they kept me away from her. They said she needed rest, that visitors upset her, that I should stay home and let them handle everything. She died without me there. I never got to say goodbye. Now they were planning to sell her house, my home, behind my back. The next morning, I opened the files on the USB drive from the shoebox. My hands trembled as I plugged it into my old laptop. The battery was low, but I had enough power to see what they'd been hiding from me all these years. The files loaded slowly, each folder revealing something worse than the last. The first folder contained bank statements. Withdrawals from accounts in my name that I'd never authorized. $4,000 here, $2,500 there, $7,800 transferred in a single transaction to an account I didn't recognize. The theft went back 3 years, transaction after transaction draining everything I'd saved. The second folder held emails, messages that looked like they came from my email address but weren't mine, requests for wire transfers, authorizations for account closures, instructions to send money to addresses I'd never seen before. They'd created fake email accounts using my name. They'd impersonated me to steal my own money. I scrolled faster, my heart racing, my breath coming in short gasps. There were signed documents with my signature, but I hadn't signed them. Credit applications I'd never submitted. Loan agreements I'd never seen or agreed to. My name was forged again and again and again, page after page. The total they'd stolen was over $47,000, every dollar I'd saved since I started working at 16. One file on the USB drive was labeled Plan B. I almost didn't open it. The name sounded harmless, like a backup option or a secondary idea for some minor project. But something in my gut told me to click on it, so I did, and what I found made my blood run cold. Inside were email threads between my mother and my aunt, stretching back 18 months, long before I'd been sent to the basement. Long before my grandmother had even died, they'd been planning this. Every detail was calculated. Every contingency was mapped out. The emails discussed how to have me declared mentally unstable. If she fights us on the house, my mother wrote in one message, we claim she's not mentally fit to make legal decisions. I have a contact, a doctor's cousin who owes me a favor, who can write up whatever documentation we need. No one will believe her word over ours. We're her family. My aunt had responded within hours. Perfect. Make sure she has nothing left in her name by then. No savings, no assets, no resources. She'll be completely dependent on us for survival. She won't have any choice but to do what we say. I read the words 3 times to make absolutely sure I understood them correctly. They weren't just stealing my money. They were building a case to take away my legal rights entirely. Rowan came down the basement stairs that night carrying a sandwich on a paper plate and a bottle of water. He was my cousin, my aunt's only son, and he'd always been the quiet one in the family. He never joined in when they made jokes at my expense, but he never stopped them either. He just watched with that uncomfortable expression, like he wanted to disappear. I'm sorry about how they're treating you, he said quietly, setting the food on an old plastic crate. He wouldn't meet my eyes, his gaze fixed on the concrete floor. I told them it was wrong to put you down here. They didn't care. They never listened to me. Do you know what they're planning? I asked carefully, watching his face for any reaction. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable. I know they're hiding something. About you, about your... He stopped suddenly, his face going pale as he realized what he'd almost said. About my what? I pressed. I shouldn't have said anything. He was already backing toward the stairs, his eyes wide. Forget I mentioned it, please. Rowan, about my what? He paused at the top of the stairs, his hand on the door. Your birth. There's something about your birth they never wanted you to know. Something big. The door closed behind him before I could ask anything else. I went back to the shoebox immediately, and searched through everything again with new eyes. At the very bottom, underneath all the letters and financial statements, I found a birth certificate I'd somehow missed the first time. The paper was old and yellowed, creased from being folded and unfolded many times over the years. One corner was torn away, as if someone had tried to rip the whole thing apart and then stopped halfway through. I held it up to the lamplight with shaking hands and read every single line. My name was there, Leora, but the last name printed on the certificate wasn't Keene. It was Hale. Leora Hale. And the father listed on the line below wasn't the man who'd raised me until I was 12 years old. It was someone I'd never heard of, Orrin Hale. There was an address in another state, a city I'd never been to, a signature I'd never seen before. I felt the room tilt and spin around me like I was going to faint. The man I'd thought was my father, the man my mother said had abandoned me because I was too much trouble, wasn't my biological father at all. I had another family somewhere out there, a family I'd never known existed. The next morning, I called the hospital listed on the birth certificate. I used my cell phone with the volume turned low, pressed tight against my ear so no one upstairs would hear me talking. My heart hammered so hard I was sure it would give me a way through the floorboards. A clerk answered on the third ring and asked how she could help me today. "I'm trying to get information about my birth records," I said, keeping my voice as steady as possible. I gave her the date and location from the certificate. "There's a serious discrepancy in my documents, and I need to understand what happened. I need the original records." She typed on her computer for a moment, then paused. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but these records have been sealed by family request. I can't release any information without proper authorization from the parties who made that request." "But I'm one of the parties involved," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts. "It's my own birth certificate. These are my records." "The sealing request was made by your legal guardians when you were a minor. You'd need to speak with them directly to have it unsealed. There's nothing I can do from my end." My legal guardians, my mother and aunt, the people who'd hidden this from me my entire life. Then someone knocked hard on the basement door above me, and I shoved the phone under my blanket just in time. My mother barged down the stairs with her face twisted in fury, her footsteps heavy and aggressive on the wooden steps. "What are you doing down here?" she demanded, her eyes scanning every corner of the basement like she was searching for evidence of crimes. "I heard you talking to someone. Who were you on the phone with just now?" "Nobody," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I was just talking to myself. It's lonely down here." "Don't you dare lie to me." Her eyes landed on the shoebox, still sitting open on the crate beside my blanket, and the color drained from her face. Her whole body went rigid. "Where did you get that box? Where did you find it?" "It was behind the washer," I said carefully. "Hidden in the corner with a bunch of things that belonged to me, letters with my name on them, documents about my finances." She strode across the basement and grabbed for the box, but I was faster. I'd already hidden the most important documents, the birth certificate, the Plan B emails, the worst of the financial fraud, under the loose step at the bottom of the staircase the night before. "These aren't yours," she hissed, clutching the box to her chest. "These are family papers, private things that don't concern you." "My birth certificate is private. Letters addressed to me are private." Her face went white. "I saw the name on the certificate," I said quietly. "Orrin Hale, the man listed as my father." She stood frozen for 3 full seconds. Then she muttered, "I told them to burn that," and stopped, realizing too late what she'd just admitted out loud. Rowan came back down to the basement 2 days later, guilt and fear written all over his pale face. He waited until my mother and aunt drove away for their weekly grocery trip, then crept down the stairs like he was afraid of every sound he made. He sat on the bottom step with his elbows on his knees and still wouldn't look directly at me. "I shouldn't have run away the other night," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I got scared, but you deserve to know the truth about everything. You've deserved it for a long time." "Then tell me," I said, "all of it." He took a long, shaky breath. Your grandmother tried to leave you this house. Not your mom, you specifically. She had a will drawn up with a lawyer when you turned 21. She wanted to make sure you'd always have a home, no matter what happened with the rest of the family. My chest tightened painfully. They stole my inheritance. They forged documents and got witnesses to lie. They contested the will in probate court and claimed she wasn't in her right mind at the end. They made it look like the will never existed at all. He finally met my eyes for the first time. There's a lawyer who knows everything that happened. Your grandmother's lawyer. She made him swear to find you if things went wrong. He pulled a crumpled business card from his pocket. His name is Marcus Webb. She trusted him with her life. Marcus Webb's office was downtown in an old brick building with brass fixtures and worn burgundy carpet that had seen better days. He was in his early 60s, with thick white hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Those eyes went sad the moment I introduced myself in his doorway. He'd been waiting for me, he said quietly. He'd tried to find me after my grandmother died, but my family had blocked every single attempt to make contact. She loved you more than anyone in this world, he said, gesturing for me to sit across from his cluttered desk. You need to know that first before anything else. You were the most important person in her life. He opened a drawer and handed me a sealed envelope with my name written across the front in her familiar handwriting. The same loops and curves I remembered from birthday cards and grocery lists and notes she'd leave on my pillow. Inside was a letter explaining everything. She'd left the house to me, specifically and legally to me, to be transferred on my 25th birthday. She'd known my mother would try to contest it, so she'd set up protections. Witnesses to her mental competency, notarized documents, everything proper and legal. But they'd gotten to the witnesses. They'd paid some off and threatened others. They'd won the probate challenge by default when no one showed up to defend her wishes. Your birthday is in 2 months, Marcus said. If we prove fraud before then, the house reverts to you automatically. Marcus told me something else that afternoon, something that broke me more completely than anything I'd found in that basement. They kept you away from her at the end, he said gently, folding his hands on the desk. But that wasn't her choice. It was never her choice. They told her you didn't want to visit. They said you were too busy with your own life, that you'd moved on, that you'd stopped caring about her, that you'd found better things to do than sit with a dying old woman. That's not true. My voice cracked and broke apart. I asked to see her every single week. They told me the doctors said no visitors. They said I'd make her worse. She died thinking you'd abandoned her, Leora. She wrote you letters every week that they never delivered. She waited for you every single day, watching the door. They told her you never came because you didn't love her anymore. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The grief I'd carried for 2 years cracked open into something raw and devastating, a wound that went all the way down. They'd stolen my money. They'd stolen my inheritance. They'd planned to steal my legal rights and my sanity. But this was the worst thing of all. They'd let my grandmother die believing I'd abandoned her. They'd stolen our last months together and poisoned her final memories of me. Something hardened in my chest like cooling steel. I took the evidence to the bank the following Monday and asked to speak with someone in their fraud investigation department. The investigator was a woman named Helen who'd worked in financial crimes for over 15 years. She had sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner that immediately made me feel like I was finally talking to someone competent. I spread all the documents across her desk systematically. The forged signatures, the fake email accounts, the unauthorized withdrawals going back 3 years. I showed her the USB drive and walked her through every file, every transaction, every lie. She studied the papers in silence, her expression growing darker and more serious with each page she turned. This is a textbook identity theft and fraud pattern, she said finally, looking up at me. Multiple forged signatures across different document types, unauthorized account access using fabricated credentials, systematic draining of assets over an extended period designed to avoid detection. She set down the papers. Who did this to you? My mother and my aunt, I said. She didn't flinch or look surprised. Family fraud is far more common than most people realize. It's also harder to prosecute because victims often feel guilty about pressing charges against relatives. "I don't feel guilty," I said, and I meant it. "I feel angry." Helen nodded slowly, something like respect in her eyes. "Good. This may become a criminal matter. These amounts constitute felony theft." When I got back to the house that afternoon, I heard them celebrating in the kitchen. I stood silently in the basement doorway at the top of the stairs and listened. Champagne glasses clinked together. My aunt was laughing that cruel, satisfied laugh I'd grown to despise. My mother's voice was smug and pleased with herself. "The listing goes live tomorrow morning," she announced. "The realtor says we'll have multiple offers within the first week, maybe even the first few days. Cash buyers who want to close fast, no inspections, no contingencies. Quick and clean." "And what about Leora?" my aunt asked. "What about her? By the time she figures out what happened, we'll be long gone with the money. She can figure out somewhere else to live. A shelter, the street, I don't really care. She's not our responsibility anymore. She never really was." More laughter, more champagne pouring. They were planning to sell my grandmother's house, my inheritance, and vanish before my 25th birthday. They were going to take everything and leave me with nothing. No home, no savings, no legal recourse, no family. They thought I was still the scared, defeated girl they'd shoved into the basement a month ago. They thought I'd given up. They had absolutely no idea how much I'd learned since then, or how much I now had on them. I slipped back down the stairs into the darkness and opened my laptop. I had work to do. I stopped reacting to them entirely after that day. When my mother came down the basement stairs to lecture me about being grateful for their generosity and charity, I nodded politely and said nothing. When my aunt made pointed comments about how I'd always been a burden on the family, I looked through her like she was made of glass. Instead of engaging with their provocations, I moved quietly and strategically. I copied every file on the USB drive to 3 different secure locations: an encrypted cloud server, an external hard drive I kept hidden, and a thumb drive on a cord that I wore around my neck at all times. I photographed every physical document with timestamps. I recorded conversations through the basement ceiling when they discussed their plans, saving the audio files with dates and descriptions. I created detailed spreadsheets of the fraud, dates, amounts, account numbers, forged signatures. I organized all the evidence into clearly labeled folders that any lawyer or investigator could follow without confusion. I backed up everything twice, and then backed it up a third time on a device I kept at Marcus's office. My complete calm unsettled them far more than my anger or tears ever had. "Why are you so quiet all of a sudden?" my mother demanded one evening, her eyes narrowed with suspicion and something like fear. "You're planning something, I can tell." "I'm not planning anything," I said evenly. "I'm just tired." She didn't believe me, but she couldn't prove otherwise. 3 days before the first scheduled showing of the house, my mother cornered me in the basement with a stack of documents and a pen. "Sign these," she commanded, dropping the papers onto the plastic crate I used as a table. "We need your signature for the sale to go through. It's just standard legal paperwork, nothing complicated. Sign at the tabs and date at the bottom." I picked up the first page and read it carefully, word by word, ignoring her impatient sighing. It wasn't standard paperwork at all. It was a quitclaim deed, a legal document that would permanently sign away any claim I had to the property. If I put my signature on that line, I'd be giving them official permission to sell my inheritance right out from under me. I'd have no legal recourse whatsoever. "No," I said, setting the papers back down. Her face twisted with fury. "Excuse me." I said no. "I'm not signing anything you put in front of me." "Don't be stupid, Leora. This house doesn't belong to you. It never did and it never will. You have no claim to it. You have no claim to anything." I looked her directly in the eyes, truly looked, and saw the woman who'd spent my entire life convincing me I was worthless and unlovable. "I know about grandmother's real will," I said quietly. "I know about the forged documents and the stolen money. I know about Plan B, I know about Orrin Hale. The color drained from her face completely. I know everything, I said, and I'm not signing. That night, they tore the basement apart like animals searching for prey. I heard them coming down the stairs, heavy footsteps, angry voices, and managed to grab my backpack containing the hard drive and thumb drive before they reached the bottom. My mother threw boxes across the room with both hands, scattering 20 years of stored memories and keepsakes. My aunt ripped open old suitcases and shook out clothes I'd worn as a child, throwing everything onto the dirty floor. "Where is it?" my mother screamed, her voice ragged and desperate. "Where did you hide everything?" "Hide what?" I asked calmly. "Don't play stupid with me. The papers, the drive, whatever evidence you've been collecting down here, where is it?" They searched for over an hour, growing more frantic and careless with every passing minute. They pulled the washer and dryer away from the walls. They tore apart old furniture and sliced open boxes with kitchen knives. They never found the loose step where I'd hidden the most damaging physical documents, and they never once thought to check the backpack I was wearing on my shoulders. In their panic and fury, they got sloppy. A folded letter fell out of my aunt's jacket pocket during the search. I grabbed it before she noticed and tucked it into my waistband. Later that night, alone in the wreckage they'd created, I read it by flashlight. The letter was dated 12 years ago, written in my mother's handwriting. "Orrin keeps calling and asking questions. He still doesn't know about the girl. We need to make absolutely sure he never finds out." I found Orrin Hale on a rainy Tuesday afternoon 2 weeks later. Marcus had helped me trace the address listed on my birth certificate through public records. It led to a modest house in a small town 2 states away, with a well-kept yard and a vegetable garden growing beneath the front windows. I sat in my rental car outside for 20 minutes, working up the courage to walk to the door. Finally, I made myself get out and knock. A man answered. He was in his late 50s, with gray hair at the temples and kind eyes that went wide with shock the instant he saw my face. His hand gripped the doorframe like he needed it to stay standing. "Liara," he whispered, his voice breaking on my name. "You know who I am. You look exactly like your mother did at your age. The woman who told me He stopped, unable to finish, tears already streaming down his weathered face. "I've been trying to find you for 23 years. They told me you didn't exist. They told me she made up the pregnancy to manipulate me. They swore there was no baby." He reached out like he wanted to touch my face, then stopped himself, unsure if he had the right. "I didn't know," he said, his voice cracking completely. "I swear to God I didn't know you were real. I would have come for you. I would have fought for you. They hid you from me your entire life." I stood on his doorstep as 24 years of lies collapsed around me like a demolished building. Orrin invited me inside his home and introduced me to his family, with tears still wet on his face. His wife Camille made tea and set out homemade cookies on a blue ceramic plate like she'd been preparing for this exact moment her entire marriage. She had warm eyes and a gentle voice that immediately put me at ease. Orrin's 2 younger children, my half-brother and half-sister, I realized with a shock, sat across from me at the kitchen table with curious, open, welcoming expressions. Nobody interrogated me. Nobody demanded explanations or proof. Nobody made me feel like an intruder or a burden. "We always hoped you'd find us somehow," Camille said softly, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Orrin never stopped looking for you. Never. Every single year on your birthday, he'd light a candle and say a prayer that you were safe and loved somewhere. That someone was taking care of you." I didn't realize how starved I'd been for basic human kindness until I sat at their dinner table that evening. No one criticized me or made cutting remarks disguised as jokes. No one reminded me that I was difficult or disappointing or too much trouble to love. No one watched me with cold, calculating eyes. They asked questions about my life, my interests, my hopes, questions that assumed I was worth knowing. They listened when I talked. They laughed with me instead of at me. When I finally left that night, Orrin held me in a long, tight hug. "You have a real family now," he said. "Whatever you need, we're here." Marcus and I, filed the legal papers on a Thursday morning at the county courthouse. We submitted an emergency motion to block the sale of my grandmother's house pending investigation of fraud and forgery. We filed civil claims for identity theft, financial fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. We submitted all the evidence documenting the forged will contest, the fabricated emails, the stolen money, the systematic destruction of my grandmother's true wishes. The documents were served to my mother and my aunt at their home, addressed that same afternoon by a county sheriff's deputy. I wasn't there when they opened the official envelopes and read what was inside, but Rowan texted me within the hour with updates. "They're completely losing it," he wrote. "Your mom threw a lamp at the wall and shattered it. Your aunt is screaming about lawyers and lawsuits and how you've ruined everything. They're talking about packing up and leaving the state tonight before anything else gets filed." I read his messages and felt a grim, cold satisfaction I hadn't expected to feel. They'd spent my entire life telling me I was powerless and worthless. They'd convinced me I had no options, no resources, no way to fight back against them. Now they were discovering exactly how wrong they'd been. The house sale was legally blocked. The fraud investigation was officially opened. Law enforcement was involved. I was done being buried in the dark. Their carefully constructed world collapsed faster than I'd imagined possible. Word about the lawsuit spread through the community within days. People talk in small towns, and this story was too dramatic to stay quiet. The realtor who'd listed the house dropped them as clients immediately after learning about the fraud investigation and the blocked sale. She wanted nothing to do with the liability. Friends and neighbors who'd believed their stories about me for years, that I was troubled, mentally unstable, ungrateful, impossible to help, stopped calling once the truth started coming out. People who'd clucked their tongues sympathetically while my mother complained about her difficult daughter now crossed the street to avoid eye contact. Someone posted the public court documents online with commentary. The post went viral locally. Comments filled up with people sharing their own stories of family betrayal and financial abuse, expressing support for me and outrage at what had been done. My aunt made a scene at the grocery store when she overheard two women whispering about the case in the produce section. She screamed at them until the manager came, and someone recorded the whole meltdown on their phone. The video was viewed over 5,000 times in 2 days. Their social circle disintegrated completely. Their reputation in the community rotted and collapsed. I didn't gloat publicly or add commentary. I didn't post anything online or tell anyone what they should think. The truth was enough. I just let it do its work. The court hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday morning in the middle of October. I sat at the front of the courtroom with Marcus beside me and told the truth as calmly and clearly as I could. I explained the basement and the hidden shoebox and the forged documents. I presented the evidence systematically: the fraudulent emails, the stolen bank records, the fake signatures, the birth certificate they'd hidden for 24 years, the letter proving they'd deliberately kept me from my biological father. My mother and aunt sat at the defendant's table with their attorney, a nervous-looking man who kept shuffling his papers. They interrupted constantly throughout my testimony. They cried performatively and claimed I was lying about everything to destroy them. When their own stories contradicted each other, they turned on one another, pointing fingers and assigning blame. "She's always been mentally troubled," my mother told the judge desperately. "She's making all of this up because she wants to hurt us. We loved her. We sacrificed everything for her." I didn't respond to any of it. I didn't need to. The documents spoke for themselves. The judge reviewed all the evidence carefully for a long time, asking occasional questions, taking notes. Then she ruled. The house belonged to me. My grandmother's original will was valid. The fraud investigation would proceed with possible criminal referrals. I was the rightful legal heir to everything they'd tried to steal. I felt relief wash through me, not triumph, not satisfaction, just release. They made one final attempt to regain control before it was truly over. My mother called me the night after the court ruling, her voice thick with tears I no longer believed were real. She'd cried wolf too many times, manipulated too many situations with false emotion. I didn't trust anything from her anymore. "You've completely destroyed this family," she said bitterly. "Everything your grandmother spent her whole life building, everything we sacrificed for years, you've ruined all of it out of spite. For money, for a house. Are you proud of yourself now?" I listened to her talk for 3 full minutes without interrupting. The guilt trips, the accusations, the complete rewriting of history that transformed her into the victim and me into the villain who'd attacked unprovoked. Then I said, "I'm going to hang up now. You owe us after everything we—" "I don't owe you anything," I said, cutting her off. "You stole my money and my inheritance. You stole my father and my grandmother's final years. You stole my entire childhood and made me believe I was worthless and unlovable. You did all of that deliberately, and you'd still be doing it if I hadn't found that box." Silence on the other end of the line. "I hope you find peace someday," I said and meant it, "but you're not going to find it through me." I hung up and blocked her number permanently. Then I blocked my aunt. The weight I'd carried my entire life finally lifted from my shoulders. I stood in the doorway of the house after the renovation was complete, sunlight pouring through clean windows onto freshly painted walls and refinished hardwood floors. The basement had been transformed. New lighting, new flooring, built-in shelves, and a proper workspace where I could build something of my own. I'd turned the place they'd used to bury and break me into proof that I'd not only survived but grown stronger. Rowan helped me paint the upstairs bedrooms over a long weekend. He'd apologized more times than I could count and started therapy to understand why he'd stayed silent for so many years while they hurt me. I didn't blame him anymore. He'd been trapped in that house too, just in a different kind of cage. Oren drove up from his town with Camille and my half-siblings to see the finished house. They brought housewarming gifts wrapped in cheerful paper and stayed for a long dinner around my grandmother's old dining table, my table now. We talked about the future, about holidays together, about making up for 24 lost years. For the first time in my entire life, I felt like I truly belonged somewhere. The basement was behind me, literally and emotionally. The lies were exposed and dismantled. The people who tried to destroy me were facing consequences I hadn't needed to engineer. The truth had done that work all by itself. I locked the front door that night and walked slowly through every room, touching the walls my grandmother had loved. I made myself a promise. I would never shrink for anyone again. I would never let anyone convince me I deserved to be buried. I was finally living in the light.